Thank you all for joining today. This is the second part of a two-part session presented on behalf of the OJJDP Tribal Youth Resource Center. We are a cooperative partner of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, and we serve CTAS Purpose Areas 8, which is Tribal Juvenile Healing to Wellness Courts, and Tribal Youth Programs, which is CTAS Purpose Area 9. So again, we want to thank you all for your presence today. My name is Anna Clough. I'm Muskogee Creek and Uchee. I serve as a co-director at the Tribal Youth Resource Center, and I'm very honored to be here today with our facilitators of this session, Chris Pacheco and Lori Vallejos. So we can go to the next slide. And this is the second part of a two-part learning series. And Chris and Lori will be giving us a recap of session 1. Today's session is about case management, and so we're looking forward to today's session. If you missed session 1, we do have archived video of that presentation. So you are welcome to view session 1 if you were not able to participate. We are really glad if you were able to be on session 1. If you're here today for session 2, we're looking forward to the conversation and the dialogue. So with that, I will hand it over to Chris and Lori. Again, thank you so much for your presence and your facilitation. We're looking forward to today's session.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're joining us from. And thank you for joining us. If you are joining us for this second time or you were with us during our first session, we want to welcome you back. And if this is your first session, we want to welcome you. So thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Pacheco. I am a Tribal Law and Policy Wellness Specialist for Tribal Law and Policy Institute. By training, I am a licensed drug and alcohol abuse counselor in the state of New Mexico. I am from the Pueblo of Laguna, so this is where I'm coming to you from. And I'm going to let my colleague, Lori, introduce herself.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who are with us for session 1, welcome back. I'm glad that you're here. My name is Lori Vallejos, and I am a clinician with the Pueblo of Laguna Behavioral Health, and I'm also a consultant for TLPI. I'm joining you today from the Pueblo of Laguna as well as I'm sitting here. You can see me sitting in my office. So I'm excited to talk with you and really create the dialogue about case management models and treatment and how this applies to juvenile healing to wellness court.
Great. Thanks, Lori. We just wanted to provide a little bit of highlights that we went through during our first session and just kind of build. And like we said, we wanted to build on that session with the information we're going to provide you with. So some of the things that we went through the last time, we talked a little bit about drug trends, drugs of choice in tribal communities, drugs of choice among adolescents. And then we also, Lori gave us a very good presentation on addiction as a disease, and I'm going to let her highlight that a little bit more because she did a really good job of also doing some brain work as well.
So in session 1, for those of you who were not with us, we tried to make this as simple and practical to our work. I know when we're talking about addiction as a disease, sometimes we could get lost in it. So we try to apply how the brain works and how adolescents, their thinking, and how drug use affects decision making. So we will be highlighting parts of that in today's session as well with some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about. And I do welcome any questions you may have as we go along. Please feel free to enter those into the chat box. I don't think we have talked about how we want that handled, but we will be monitoring the chat box. And if we're not able to get to that at the specific time that you ask, we will have some time at the end in a question section.
So we gave a lot of kind of heavy information during our first session. We talked about addiction as a disease, how that applies to adolescents. But we also wanted to provide you with some information, things that you can do in your community, or maybe things that you are already doing in your community, and look to those resources. We talked a little bit about prevention, how prevention is one of those things that we can still utilize, prevention programs. What are the other tribal programs in your community that you can call on to help work with the students that you're working with in a juvenile healing to wellness court? Because we have a wealth of resources that we're really fortunate to have. Or also, how is it that you can start to work with or collaborate with another program, maybe a program that you hadn't really thought about using? So we wanted to make sure that we also gave you some problem solving kind of tips as well. And so for today's session, and next slide.
So let's talk about what our session objectives are. So in this session, participants will survey case management models and consider issues such as communication, confidentiality, and reporting. Participants will consider how treatment services operate in coordination of components of the youth's individual case plan. And the last thing that we're going to look at is participants will engage in dialogue regarding community resources that may support overall juvenile healing to wellness court services and operations. This is really, this last point, the last objective is really what we want to spend some time on at the end of the session, is that dialogue, because we know that each tribal community has unique situations and needs, and we'd like to hear from you. Next slide. So the first thing let's talk about is, who is our Healing to Wellness Court team? For some of you, you may have a Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court program in operation, and for some of you, you may just be thinking about starting one. So there's some key people that need to be at the table. That would be the judge, the prosecutor, defense counsel, treatment providers, probation, law enforcement, social service, community leaders, traditional healers, case management, coordinator, education liaison, housing representative, and vocational training. Now, I'd like to say this is ideal. We understand that not all tribal communities may have access to every one of these. So when you're looking at building a Healing to Wellness Court team, there may be some that are missing from this list. Let's say you don't have vocational training within your tribal community, or you don't have housing representative at this point. This would be the gold standard that you're looking to try to achieve or to keep in mind as different resources become available within your community. But there are some other ones that are necessary. The judge, the prosecutor, the defense, treatment, probation. So those are the ones that are absolutely necessary. And as we go out to and we do TA visits with different tribal communities, we see that many communities have some of these in place, but are still striving for the other. So as I said, think of this list as a gold standard, but this could not be all, maybe this isn't all inclusive either. Maybe your tribal community has other resources that you feel are important to be at the table. And by all means, if that's the case, please do invite. So, you know your community better than we do at this point, since we see your names on our list of who's in attendance. So feel free to invite others to the table. This would be one of the functions of your coordinator for your program, is to look and to advocate for more people at the table. The other thing that we realize is that some of these roles may be shared by the same person. As we were thinking about this presentation, we thought of the most common roles that we see shared. Ideally, you would have a case manager, and you would have a coordinator, and you would have a probation officer or a therapist. But we know that these roles are sometimes shared between the same person on your team. Some of the ones that we see most commonly are coordinator, case manager, treatment provider, case manager, or probation officer, case manager, coordinator. And I want to talk a little bit about that. So this is all right. And this happens often, especially in our tribal communities when resources are scarce. We don't have the luxury of having all these different positions for the wellness court team. So as you're doing that, it's important to remember which hat you're wearing. So when you're a coordinator and a case manager and probation officer, you might have to be looking at the overall operations of the wellness court team, and then still looking at doing the probation officer roles, which the drug testing, the check-ins, and also doing some case management for your participants. You know, you might have to be advocating if your juveniles and their family is without housing. So now you're having to try to link them with housing. So it's possible to have these roles shared, but just be mindful of switching hats when you're doing that. Chris, do you want to add anything about the roles being shared?
Thank you, Lori. Yeah, and you know, we have this list of individuals for a team, and you know, we present that to you with a caveat, just that you know, sometimes in tribal communities we may not have all of these agencies, and for example, like Lori said, you may have an individual who has dual roles. Just like she said, for example, you may have a juvenile probation officer who is also your healing to wellness court coordinator, or you may have a coordinator / case manager. Okay. So one of the things to also be mindful of is, what is your role? What is your role on the team? And what is your, what is that duty maybe that you are having in this team? So we just wanted to bring this to your attention, that it often happens when Anna and I have done technical assistance. We've noticed this, and even from Lori and my own experience as working with our Healing to Wellness Court team, this often happens. So next slide. So we wanted to touch a little bit on confidentiality, and just to also let you know, we are getting ready to have our Tribal Healing to Wellness Court enhancement training in June, and we will have one whole session dedicated to confidentiality. We will have some very expert presenters, some judges who know about this. So we're just going to give you a little snippet about confidentiality in this, because it does play into all of this. It does play into case management, and it does play into the treatment process. So court coordinators and wellness court teams should adhere to all applicable confidentiality laws, consider all tribal and federal laws of applicability. So whatever your tribe has as a confidentiality law, I know when I worked for my tribe, we had to sign a confidentiality agreement when I first was hired. And as a licensed treatment provider, I also have ethics around what are my confidentiality laws and ways of acting, what information I could share, who I could share it with. But then also, if we receive some federal funding, like some of us do, there are federal laws that apply to us. And so we need to be mindful. We need to be mindful of what those laws are in order to protect our clients, our participants' confidentiality. So here we have the one that probably, you know, a lot of you all know is Section 42 CFR. And this requires that substance abuse treatment providers maintain the confidentiality of all participants in the substance treatment programs. However, participants in state drug treatment courts and tribal wellness courts are also required to execute limited waivers. So these could be things such as releases of information for certain periods of time. And they are confidentiality requirements to permit specifically designated individuals, for example, a Healing to Wellness Court team, to receive information about their progress and their treatment. So these are those things such as consent for treatment, releases of information, and in a Healing to Wellness Court juvenile model, we're not only just looking at the juvenile that is part of our program, but we're looking at the family or the significant adult or guardian that is joining this adolescent in this program. Okay. So treatment may share what is necessary. And, when we do TA, oftentimes we get, well, what is necessary information? And it's that information that is shared with the team about the progress of that participant. So we want to make sure that we are keeping our judge and our team well aware that, they are progressing well through this treatment process. They have met this treatment milestone, or their attitude about treatment has changed significantly. They are no longer dragging their feet when they come in for an office visit. They are actually engaging in whatever therapy process we are providing. It might be talk therapy, or they are actually maybe doing some journaling if that is part of the process. Okay. We want the team to know that. We want to share with them that progress. Also, like I said, these are things called releases of information. And we want to let our participants know and their families know the type of information that we're going to share, and what reason it's going to be used for. Okay, we don't want to blindside our clients. We don't want to blindside the families with information that they didn't, that shows up. That shows up or is heard in a status hearing. So we want to make sure that we let them know beforehand. And definitely the preservation of confidentiality contributes to our court integrity, participant honesty, and trust. And that's what we're wanting to do. We're wanting to build this trust with our participants, so they can make that progress, make those behavioral milestone progress that we would like to see during their time in Healing to Wellness Court. Next slide.
So Chris, can I interject for just a minute
Sure.
here? So typically, as clinicians or probation officers, you probably have a time when you start introducing the releases of information to clients. I typically like to do this during my first session with a client. Is I will talk about confidentiality and the limitations thereof. At that time, I'll also talk if it's a person in our Healing to Wellness Court program, I will talk about why information needs to be shared, and that's to update the team on how they're doing, and also what would happen if they weren't showing up to sessions. So usually that first session is the time. If it's not done at the intake process, the first session, it will get introduced or reintroduced if it was already given to the participant to sign off during the time of the assessment. And the other thing that I've seen done is I've also seen this happen on the probation side as well. So sometimes there might be two releases of information that are signed, one from probation and one from the clinician. And that's great because it just, it ensures that we do have that. I did see a question come up if we have a form that is a template for limited waiver agreements for participants. Chris, can you answer if TLPI has a sample one available? I know we have one here within the Pueblo of Laguna of our release of information.
Yeah, so I'm going to highlight a couple of resources. The Tribal Youth Resource Center, we do have some sample copies that we've been given permission from other tribes to share with you all. But then also in the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, the Wellness Court Treatment Guidelines publication. There's a template in that as well. And you can get that at wellnesscourts.org. That's on our website. You can download it. Or if you're still kind of like me, I still like a paper copy every now and then, you can let us know, and we can send you a copy. And Anna has also posted that you can email her directly at anna@tlpi.org, and she can also share those sample copies. And I just also wanted to highlight something that you brought up, Lori, was that, yes, we have these signed releases of information or waivers that give us permission to share certain information. However, as a practicing clinician, what I would always do is when someone would share something significant that I felt would be very good for the team to know, I would let them know verbally, wow, this is a great breakthrough that you've made. We can definitely see the changes that you're making. I would really like your permission to share this with the team, because I think it's something so great. Or it could be an issue that's come up in an individual session. I would get verbal approval from my client to share that. Again, and in an attempt not to blindside them, but also in an attempt to share some progress or some issues with the rest of the team. It also does create that trust, and that trust in not only just the clinician, but the Healing to Wellness Court team and process. I just wanted to add that on. Thanks, Lori.
Absolutely, Chris. Thanks. So now let's talk about some models of case management that may be used within your program. And I want you guys to know that right now I'm referencing the TLPI case management, and this is the May 2018. So the four models that TLPI talks about that are proven effective for case management is the first is strength-based perspective. And this simply means getting to know your participant. What are their strengths? Does your juvenile, is sports one of the things that motivates them to not drink or use drugs? Is their family a strength? Tradition. So when we look at the strength model, the case manager will provide support in these areas, whether it be education, whether it be housing, whether it be athletics, tradition, community involvement. That's the goal of this first model of case management. Oftentimes we're doing that, right? Probation officers, you're doing that. Coordinators, you're doing that. You're asking the kid, what motivates you? What do you like? And here's the other thing. If you ask those questions and you're getting something like, I don't know, I don't really have anything, then it's going to be your job to really look and to work with that client on their strengths. We talk about these as protective factors. We talk about these all throughout treatment. So oftentimes, most of us are doing some form of this case management. The next one that we look at is a broker or generalist. This is probably the model that has the least direct contact or with a client. When a broker generalist would do is they would do the intake or the assessment. At that point, they would hand all case management off somewhere else. So if you're a community that has lots of resources or has a program that offers case management services, you might be able to do this. Do a needs assessment, figure out what is needed for this client, and then have them do the case management piece. The next one is assertive community treatment. And I always say those of you that have the luxury of having smaller participants may be able to do this model, because what this is a very intense type of case management. Sometimes this can be shared, or oftentimes this is shared within different team members. So the therapist, the probation officer, the coordinator, maybe law enforcement can all choose to have certain participants on their caseload, and they can break this up and provide intense case management. So at a staffing, this might look like whoever, so if I was called on in a staffing, I would report on Matthew and Terry and Christine. I would report all of the things that are happening within their treatment, any services that need to be provided to the client or their families. So this, I say that the luxury of having a small amount of participants in your program, because as we all know, case management is time consuming. So if you have a lot of participants in your program, this may not be the model that you choose to use as your team. The last one that we look at is the clinical or the rehabilitation one. I seem to do this one often with my clients, and whether that was assigned or that was my idea that this is what I was going to do, it just seems like in my therapy sessions, when I hear something that a client needs, if one of the kids comes in and says, I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do, the first thing I'm doing is, okay, do we need to, look at some doctor's appointments or benefits for mom and baby? If a kid comes in here and says, my family is going to have to be leaving the home and I don't know where we're going, at that point, I would, in addition to therapy and treatment and what they needed to do for the program, I would be doing a lot of case management. And this is where I talk about roles being shared, because we all know when a client comes to us with an issue, we can't say, that's not my job. I don't do that. We work with the kid and the family to address what the issues that are going on in order for our juveniles and their families to be successful. When we look at the clinical and rehabilitation model, there is 5 principles that guide this model. And the first one is the continuity of care. So what that means is that, this may not, even though they're in the program, and let's say they're getting ready to graduate, they still may need resources beyond our program. So we need to make sure that there's a continuation of their care, whether that be medical, education, housing, additional treatment services that need to be in place in order for this person to remain clean and sober. The next one, the next principle that guides this is that case management relationship is important. So oftentimes when we get a juvenile or even adults into our programs, that relationship is important. They're going to call you again. So even though their time in the program may be done, you may get that call a year later. I need some help. Or I'm still clean and sober, and they're excited and they want to talk about now going to school because they're graduating high school. So that relationship is key here. The next principle is there needs to be support and structure in response to the client's needs. We know that clients' needs are going to change at different points in the program. When they get into our program, the needs may be, they're high need, right? They need a lot at that time. They need support for showing up to school, to make their call-ins to probation, to make their counseling appointment. So their needs, transportation. I realized that I hadn't mentioned anything about transportation up until now, and that's a need. So the fourth principle here is flexibility. Within case management, we know we need to be flexible. Needs arise at all hours of the night. Are we able to respond to those needs? How are we going to respond to those needs when that happens? Transportation issues. That's a big one that I see within tribal communities is, getting to appointments. Are we flexible with our hours? Do we have services outside of the 8 to 4:30, right? We know working in this field is that our jobs are not 8 to 4:30. We need to be flexible with this. Appointment times. Families may be working and they can't be at a family session until 6 o'clock. Is that an option within your program? How are you going to make that possible so that all families could succeed? And the last thing, and it kind of ties back into the first one, is facilitating the client's strengths. So again, we heard that when I first started with the case management models, and ending in that. All clients have strengths. Sometimes it is our job to find out what those are if the client cannot identify them themselves. Next slide.
So just to recap and add on to what Lori said, we should also be looking at opportunities for us to, one, teach the family how to access these resources on their own. We can do things such as a nice soft handoff to a clinician. For example, if I had a Healing to Wellness Court client, a juvenile, and this maybe was their first time in treatment, and I know that Lori is their treatment provider, and I kind of get a sense that they're a little bit apprehensive about going to treatment. I might take, that I might go to that first session with with Lori. And, I would say, hey, this is Lori. This is kind of what she does. This is her office. I'm going to step out and let you all get acquainted for a few minutes, but just to make that transition comfortable. And I've done that. I've called specific providers and said, hey, so and so is coming to see you, or let's schedule at this time, because I used to be a probation officer. I would send people down to behavioral health, and it's less than a mile, not maybe a little bit over a mile. Somehow they would lose their way down there. And part of it was because maybe they just didn't want to go, or they were apprehensive. So if we kind of show them and say, it's not so bad, we do a nice soft handoff to that provider. So just in doing case management. Okay. So we have been asked, or, when I was directly working with clients, I started out working with adolescents, which was so informational. Just, I learned so much. And and then as I transitioned into working with adults, I noticed a difference. And as I've been doing training and technical assistance, I've been to some communities that, I've gone into work with a juvenile healing to wellness court team, and the treatment is like, oh yeah, we have this, we have matrix, we have DBT, we have this. And I asked, okay, well, what specifically do you have for adolescents? And we're like, oh yeah, we have all of that. Doesn't it just all the same? And really the short answer is no. There is a difference between adolescent treatment and adult treatment. When we talk about adults, they're diagnosed with a substance use disorder based on the DSM-5. Okay, so there's a list of criteria. There's 11 criteria that an individual has to meet. There has to be a noticeable presence and severity and progression based on these 11 criteria. So when we finally get that diagnosis and we say, okay, yeah, they meet this many criteria, they meet 6 or more, they also have their severity is high, then we start to look at what level of care that they need, and we go to the ASAM criteria. So that helps to give us a placement and level of care for adults. Next slide. The difference between adolescent treatment and adult treatment is that adolescents, because of their age, are more likely to engage in risky behavior. For those of you who were with us in our first session, Lori did a really good job, and I'm gonna have her come in and just kind of recap the brain dynamics of adolescence and that risky behavior. Lori?
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for reminding me of that. In the first session, I was talking about the prefrontal cortex and the part of our brain that is responsible for judgment and decision making. And as we know, and as I talked about in the first session, is that the brain doesn't fully develop until about 25. There's some research now that's saying it's a little later, especially for males. But this is the part of our brain that says, should I do this? Should I sneak out my window tonight? Should I go drink with my friends? And for teenagers, it's that the brain isn't developed. So we're asking them to make these decisions about life and their behaviors when it's difficult. So they're more likely to engage in these risky behaviors, getting in a car and going 90 miles an hour without a seatbelt. Going and doing some binge drinking with their friends, which we see happen often for teenagers. So we need to be mindful about this is developmentally, where are our clients? Adolescents are very different than adults because of this.
Thanks, Lori. And just like Lori said, so when we're looking at adolescents, that risky behavior, because of their age and because of their brain development, they're more apt just to do things like, oh yeah, I'm gonna jump off that bridge. Whereas when we're looking at adults and their response is they're more likely to engage in risky behavior while under the influence. Okay, so this is something that we should consider when we're looking at adolescents in treatment, the difference. Also, adolescents may move quicker from experimentation to tolerance of certain substances. And if you notice, I have a little asterisk there. And that could be one of the caveats that I want to bring up for you all to be mindful of is their drug of choice. So, we may have an adolescent who started smoking marijuana or maybe started smoking cigarettes at the age of 10 or 11. Okay. They're now 13, 14, and they're starting to get in the juvenile justice system. But by now, they're not only just smoking pot, they have experimented with cocaine. They have done some of, I'm not sure if these are still popular, but I remember hearing about where kids would bring in large quantities of either over-the-counter drugs or prescription drugs and kind of throw them in a hat and then pull out handfuls and take them, not really knowing what they were, what the effect was. And that's another sign of risky behavior. Alcohol. So they may move quicker from that experimentation to that tolerance phase that we notice more so with adults. Okay, so an adult, let's say they started drinking, every day after work, had a few beers, but by now they are drinking in the morning just to feel right. So that tolerance is increased. Adolescents may move faster, and like I said, once again, it could be. Please pay attention to that juvenile's drug of choice. Also, adolescents tend to be more poly, which means they use more drugs at the same time. They're trying out everything. They're trying out that meth. If you give them something, they'll probably do it. So those are things for us to pay attention to. Also, adults usually experience withdrawal symptoms after years of abuse. Less likely for adolescents, even after heavy use. Once again, I have an asterisk there because there's a caveat. Looking at that juvenile's drug of choice that they're utilizing as well. We know that individuals who use meth for a long time or use meth, there is some withdrawal symptoms that happen immediately after. Using marijuana for long periods of time or heavy uses, although they're not very outwardly, but we notice some irritability with individuals. Okay. So once again, paying attention to the individuals and doing a good kind of assessment, drug history assessment during your time of assessment. Also, cravings as defined by adolescents should be scrutinized. We should kind of take a look at, the kid that says, oh my gosh, I really wish I could get stoned right now. I just really need to be high. Or, man, this weekend, I just really want to just drink and I want to be drunk the whole weekend. Okay. So we should take a look at what is behind those cravings. And also considering the social context in which that drug of choice is being used. Is it getting high with your friends and playing video games the whole weekend? Or is it getting drunk the whole weekend and, doing things in the community or, engaging in risky behavior with your friends? And then also that word of caution to look at those individuals who are using alone. Do you have, asking an adolescent during an intake, so tell me about when you use, who are you with someone, tell me, time, place, whatever. And it could be that when they first started, they started getting high with their buddies to laugh and goof and, have fun. But now they are finding that they need to get high in between classes at school just to make it through the day. Okay. So when doing an assessment, really checking out those types of things. Next slide. So there are also some treatment differences. Lori, in a few minutes, she's going to go over the different treatment modalities. But when we're doing treatment with adolescents and adults, there are some treatment differences, but there are also some similarities. So when we respond with treatment, there are things such as residential treatment, intensive outpatient group, etc. So they're generally the same for adults and adolescents. However, the difference is when working with adults, the focus of recovery is employment, financial stability, community engagement, the duration of use, intensity of use, parenthood issues, relationships with significant others or friends, how that individual's drug or alcohol use is affecting those things. When we're looking at adolescents, our focus on recovery is more of educational engagement. Are you not engaged in school because you're now getting high in between classes, or you're so high that your grades are dropping, or you're not going to school, you're not in the grade you should be in? Okay. Also, positive family influences or peer influences and interactions. Are you not interacting, or is your drug and alcohol use affecting your interaction with your family? Are you not going on those family trips because you would rather stay home and get high or get drunk by yourself or with your peers? Okay. Also, have their peer relationships changed? For example, were they student body presidents and, engaged in a lot of the school activities one year, and now after a summer of intensive drug use or drinking or whatever, they've now dropped out of those social circles, those positive peer influence, or they've dropped out of those pro-social activities. Okay. So these are things to look for when we're looking at adolescents. We also want to take a deeper dive into their substance use during adolescence. We want to look at any possible trauma that has happened. Has there been a recent death? Uh, is there abuse currently going on? And when I say abuse, I'm not only talking about uh, abuse from a family member or a friend, but I'm talking about dating violence as well, which can happen during the um, adolescent years. Also, looking at the possible onset of mental health issues. Now, we can't officially diagnose an adolescent with a mental health issue until a certain age. However, there are certain mental health issues where the age of onset is at certain ages. And I'm going to bring Lori in because she's got some really good information on that.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for bringing this to our attention. So, when we're working with teens, sometimes the parent will come in and say, I don't know, they're moody. I don't know what's going on. They're withdrawn. They don't want to talk to us about anything, or they're just acting funny. So we'll hear all these things. As Chris mentioned, there's some mental health issues that we start seeing in adolescents. Schizophrenia is one of the ones that I always think of. And so it's something that we need to pay attention to in order to best serve our clients. There's some other things that we see when working with adolescents, and adolescents specifically that are using substances. The moods, the mood swings that are happening could be in part because of the substance using, them being a teenager and what's happening with them at that stage of their life, or it could be a mental health issue. And the one that I usually talk about when we're talking about co-occurring disorders is something like bipolar. So someone who is bipolar might look like they're also using drugs, or someone who's using drugs, vice versa, could also look like they're bipolar. So we might see this increase of energy, really, baseline's kind of right here and energy is up here. And then it's all the way down below the charts, below the normal range, and it would just fluctuate going up and down and up and down. So these are some things that treatment providers should be looking for. If a client is looking like this after 6 months of being clean and they're still having these fluctuations in mood, that could be a good indicator that there's something beyond the substance happening at that point. So initially, as we're trying to establish the relationship with the client and get to know and talking with them, trying to differentiate. Is this a substance use issue or is this a mental health issue? Because at that point, if it becomes a mental health issue, then we need to look at what's the next step. How do we help treat this? Does that mean referral to psychiatry or IHS hospital for further evaluation to see what treatment options? How do we adapt modality of treatment? Because as we know, and as I may talk about later on, is that every treatment should be individualized. We don't do the same treatment for each client. We look at their needs and address their specific needs. That's best practice.
Thank you, Lori. And then also just speaking with some of the possible mental health issues that go on during adolescence. When I was working directly with students, I found a high number of my clientele who were using marijuana on a regular basis. Once you kind of waded through all of that, there were some social anxieties. There was some anxiety disorders that were going on, with them. So they were self-medicating with their drug of choice. So, taking a deeper dive into those issues, and especially around the suicide issue. if there are any thoughts of suicide, if there are any verbal gestures of suicide, if there's any actual physical gestures of suicide, those are things that those are questions we need to ask. Just like Lori said, making sure that treatment plan is individualized, but also that we are looking at these concerns with our adolescents. Okay, next slide.
All right, so we're going to start talking about treatment. But before we start talking about treatment modalities, why do we have evidence-based treatment within our programs? Why is it necessary for us to do evidence-based treatment? And the first reason is we're all on the same page. When we're following a treatment modality, or when we're using a form of treatment within our programs, whether that be matrix model or whether that be moral recognition therapy, we're all on the same page. All right. If possible, if you have more than one clinician that's working within your program, is all of us should be trained in the treatment modality. When I was working in Albuquerque for the juvenile drug court, we used the moral recognition therapy, and that is used for both adults and juveniles. The juvenile book may be different, somewhat different than the adult book, but we're all trained in that. So what would happen, and I've been lucky enough to work in programs where there's at least two of us that are trained in the model that we're using. And, you guys have probably all heard the expressions, if someone was hit by the bus, then what? Your program doesn't die at that point. Your program will go on. If someone, as we know, is sometimes people leave our programs. And at that point, your program will still be able to continue on seamlessly. So we're all on the same page. We all speak the same language. When we go to court, everyone knows what we're doing, and that's important. The other thing is that it's proven effective. That's why it's evidence-based treatment, right? We want to make sure that we're delivering services that we know are going to work for our target population. We want to know that our treatment modality is proven effective. All right. Earlier, I was talking about, matrix model and moral recognition therapy. And I've been fortunate to be trained in both of those models. But trained is the key word here. We need to be trained in the modality. So if you're starting the program and you're thinking about what you're going to use within your program, there's trainings that are available for these programs, moral recognition therapy, matrix. Chris, the last time you talked about a couple of other ones. Can you mention a couple of the other ones? Because we usually get asked that question of what other things do people use?
So, dialectical behavioral therapy is another one. DBT. Those are ones that I know. And then also just to kind of add on to that, Lori, is that not only just training in that modality, but using it to its fidelity. Okay. So
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah. So for example, if you are using Matrix, or Matrix is the program, and we're not associated with the developers of Matrix or anything like that. But if you are using Matrix, and Matrix has a certain amount of dosage, which is how many sessions, how many family sessions, or if there's a workbook that goes with it, it is very important that we follow it to its fidelity in order to get the the desired impact. This is very much reminds me of when I was a prevention specialist. And we were doing those evidence-based prevention programs. I would have to go in and do this many sessions with all the sixth graders, and then I would follow up with them the next year to make sure that they got the right amount of dosage and the right amount of information. Very similar, same thing. We want to run them to their fidelity. We don't want to just take bits and pieces of one program and provide it, and expect that the that the efficacy is going to happen. Okay, so we want to have that fidelity. Okay.
Thanks, Chris, for mentioning that. I'm a stickler to fidelity to the model. And the reason fidelity to the model is when it's followed to fidelity, that's when we get the effective results. If there's deviation off fidelity, then they cannot guarantee that there will be the same effect for your participants. So very important. Thanks, Chris, for mentioning, we're not advertising one over the other. I think that's something within your program that you need to decide. I've used a couple of models within different programs that I've worked for. And the last thing, and then I have a question here that came through that I want to briefly address is, with evidence-based treatment, we use culture as enhancement to that. So within your program, you look at how you're going to enhance the treatment with culture. And we know that each tribe has different cultural components to their program. And this is a place where you can use it to enhance that.
Right. Not only just using culture to enhance those, but then also, so part of that also is to do an assessment on where that individual is with their cultural identity. And when we say culture, we don't just mean their own native culture, who they identify as a native person. When I tell you I am from the Pueblo of Laguna, my cultural identity is Laguna Pueblo, because this is where I've grown up and born and raised and learned things. But then I also have a culture of my clinical people, my fellow drug and alcohol abuse counselors, my fellow TTA providers. There's a whole different culture for that. And then also when we start to look at, especially in this age range, individuals identifying as LGBTQ, that is their culture as well. Their identity is in that. So identifying their cultural identity, and how is it that we can use that cultural to enhance the treatment that we're providing. And yes, I'm going to mention, because I read the comment that was in the book. It may look like it's a cookie cutter approach, but really it's what we bring to it as our own individual, as a clinician, and how we work with the information we've collected through an assessment. And how is it that we do that? Lori, did you have a little bit more to say on that?
Yes, I do. So as I'm looking at treatment plans, whether it's the initial treatment plan, 30-day, 90 days, 6 months, a year into the program, there may be some shared pieces, especially when you're doing the evidence-based treatment. So if I'm running one modality of treatment, and part of that modality to the fidelity would be these things need to happen, that might be shared across participants. The difference, and where I really stress, because I don't like cookie cutter treatment plans. Chris and I have shared many stories about seeing places that you can pick up any client and they're all the same treatment plan, and that's not individualized treatment. The individualized treatment is because each client, as I mentioned earlier, is going to have individual needs. For some, it may be housing. For some, it may be food issues that they need help linking them with resources for benefits. For other people, it may be that education might be their issue. So that's the part where treatment plans need to be tailorized and individualized to the client.
Right, Lori. And I used to one of the jobs that I've done is also I've run chart audits for other programs, and as well as a manager. When I managed the behavioral health program, I would go pick random charts and see what was in there. And one of the things I would look at was the treatment plan. And if a treatment plan looked like a treatment plan that I read 5 cases ago, I would make sure to call that clinician in and say, okay, I'm noticing too much similarity. Tell me what this individual strengths are and how you're working with them versus this. So it's really just making sure that that treatment plan is individualized in certain areas like strengths and their specific needs. Like Lori said, when we run these evidence-based, there are certain things that we include, but it's really on the clinician and the program and us as individuals to make sure that we utilize either culture or we use that individual's strengths as part of that treatment plan. Okay, next slide.
So now let's talk about the treatment and what the approaches are. And I realize in the sake of time and also wanting to allow some time for questions is that I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail. So I apologize to some of you who may be trained in some of these areas. And if I just briefly go over them, I'm more than willing to talk with you at a later time if you want to email me and we can discuss some of these modalities. But I'm going to highlight the big ones that we see within programs. And the first one is most programs have a piece that involves group therapy. One of the things I want to highlight about group therapy, and this is from my experience and the research that I've done on group therapy, is that when we're working with adolescents, the clinician needs to be very skillful in facilitating group because adolescents tend to see this as a social time. And they might try to overrun the group with some parking lot talk, some war stories, some glorifying use, and that can derail the group process and make it harmful for participants rather than helpful, which is what, so please pay attention to this. Seek supervision, seek help if you're not familiar with running groups with adolescents, because it's much different than my time facilitating adult groups. And we don't want to do any harm to participants while in the program. However, with that being said, is group therapy is a big piece, and it can be beneficial in that peers can support one another. If the group is run, if it's a strong, stable group, participants can support. They can also confront one another, which is one of the benefits of group. Group therapy. The next one is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. Forgive me if I start talking in acronyms. I will try to avoid that as much as possible. Most people do some form of CBT therapy. And simply what this means is how our thoughts influence our behaviors. So with adolescents, we're trying to get them to slow down and be very mindful of what's going on with them. What are they thinking and what are they doing? What are their behaviors looking like? So contingency management, typically this isn't used as much within Healing to Wellness Court programs. Contingency management really focuses on rewards for certain things that happen, like showing up to therapy. We know that within our Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court programs, we don't, the therapy and the change is the reward. We do offer incentives and, for participants doing things within our program. Motivational enhancement therapy, usually this is a brief type of therapy that will lead to other forms of therapy like CBT or DBT, like Chris mentioned earlier. DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. I really like this with adolescents because there's some exercises within the DBT model that you can use that will help adolescents be mindful of what they're feeling, regulating their emotions, which we know adolescents have a hard time. Adults even have a hard time with emotional regulation. Recognizing what are high-risk behaviors. There's this really neat DBT chart that you can use, and adolescents can identify what their struggles are. They might put in one of the boxes, they might say, I want to use meth, or I want to get high with my friends. And then it would rank of severity of the cravings and did they act on this? So it gives an opportunity for the adolescents to slow down. So if any of you are familiar with DBT, great, and you're using it, even better. If you're not familiar with this, I think there's a lot of pieces that you can pull out from this, from DBT, and incorporate it with the cognitive behavioral therapy as well. EMRD, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I really like this one for adolescents as well. And the reason I like this is sometimes when an adolescent comes into your office, they may not want to talk, or they may not know how to express what's going on with them. So what I've seen happen with this modality of treatment, this can also be used with other forms, with group therapy, CBT therapy, but also some EMRD sessions. And it allows people to move from a stuck place in their life into change. So if you have an adolescent who is just seeming like they're stagnant within your program, or they're not able to talk within the sections, but something's going on there. If you have someone trained in EMRD, this might allow that push to happen within the therapeutic process. Next slide, please. Now, we know that family therapy is important within our programs. We can't expect all of this change to happen just with our juvenile. The family therapy is a huge component of this. So there's four treatment modalities that are proven effective with adolescents. And the first is the brief strategic family therapy. Typically, you see this as, hence the word brief, about 12 sessions. But in my experience in working in a juvenile drug court, is that family therapy for us, what we decided what was going to be required was once a month. So if you're wanting to use this model, this may fit into your program if you have requirements such as that. Usually when you're looking at the brief strategic family therapy model, this is based on a family systems approach, and it focuses on how family systems behave, communicate with one another. So you would be looking at families, the dynamics happening within families, and then addressing those issues that come up. I should note that with all of these modalities of treatment is that not every family is starting at the same place. So sometimes when a juvenile gets into the program, you might say, okay, you have your first family session within the first month that you get in, and that might not be clinically indicated. So again, going back to individualized treatment is that some families may be ready to do this work. Other families may not, and it may actually do more harm if you try to force this to happen with all of your participants. We've all been in those sessions where all of a sudden it's just a disaster erupts in your office, right? Because family comes in and maybe they're angry and they're yelling at the kid. And as a facilitator, you don't want that to happen. You don't want that to happen within your within your treatment session, because that could really push someone further back in their treatment. And now there's all this damage control. We need to work with the client to get up to that place. So please listen to your treatment provider about what is in the best interest of this family. Okay, now going on to a couple of the other, and I just am going to go through these pretty quickly. Family behavior therapy. Usually this is a combination of behavior contracting and contingency management. This is one of the ones that there's some identified treatment goals. Families can go in and they can say, you know, we need to work on communication, or we need to work on trust. So that would be the behavioral contracting. The therapist would start working with the family on those issues, and there would be some kind of contingency management in place as rewards for that type of treatment. Functional family therapy usually combines the family systems theory and family functioning with behavioral techniques. So looking at who the family is within that system and what are the behavioral techniques that we're going to address during this. Is it, again, is that I will practice communication in my home. I will show up to my child's educational meetings or sporting events, right, from family. So the goal in this type of therapy is to improve communication again. Parenting skills, that may be something that might be a requirement within your program, is that there might be a parenting component. And you might get a little bit of kickback from the parents saying, well, I'm not the problem. The kid's the problem. It's not me that's the issue here. But the truth is, we know that families operate as systems, right? And even though they might say, well, why am I having to do this? It's my kid who's not listening and who got into trouble. Why am I having to go to parenting? I'm fine with my parenting. But we know that families can benefit. So within this model, that might be seen is parenting classes or conflict resolution within the family. And the last one, and I've seen this one a lot within juvenile programs, is multisystemic therapy, MST. And the reason I see this often is because this is really proven to be effective for adolescents with severe substance use and delinquent behavior. Typically, the referrals that we're getting within for our programs is there's some kind of delinquent behavior, whether that be not showing up to school, getting into fights at school, other crimes committed, in addition to the substance use. So this MST is one that's used often. And really, when we're looking at MST, this looks at how substance use is viewed by the client, how it's viewed by the school, the community, traditional leaders, and it also looks at parents' behaviors. So this shines light on not only your client, but also the family as a whole. Next slide, please.
And just to add on to MST, Lori, it's a very intensive program, and it also has a very specialized staff who run it. Master's level clinician type kind of individuals. And a person who is doing MST, they may only have one family on their caseload, and that's all, maybe one or two families, and that's all they do, right?
I appreciate that, Chris, as I'm rushing through for the sake of time. Forgive me, any MST therapists, because I know there's so much more, especially to that modality of treatment, because you're right, it is very intense. Now, the last one that I want to talk about is recovery services. Assertive continuing care, typically this is used after therapy as a form of case management, and there's a lot of home-based services that happen. So getting kids to their appointments after treatment is done. As someone graduates your program, you know, what services, what case management still needs to be in place for this juvenile to continue to be successful. Peer recovery support services, I realized that earlier, I might have skipped over it when I was talking about behavioral approaches and we were talking about 12-step facilitation. Chris, do you recall, did I mention anything about the 12-step earlier, or did I wait until now?
I think you waited until now.
Okay.
You didn't say anything,
Okay.
but I remember in our conversation you were going to say something.
Okay. So many programs have a piece built into it on 12-step groups and a requirement for that. Well, this is proven to be effective. I want to say this, it's kind of that asterisk that Chris had earlier, but with the caveat of be cautious of peer recovery support services and mixing adolescents with adults in 12-step programs. What I have seen happen is that because those are peer run, they're not monitored in the same way that, let's say, a group therapy with a trained facilitator would be run. I have seen adolescents come out of 12-step meetings smoking cigarettes because the adults are doing it, or picking up on some things that typically the adults have experienced in their substance use. If your tribal community or a nearby community has young people 12-step groups, and they might even be, I've seen some young persons, or they title them like that. That may be an option. If it's not an option, you may want to think about this as part of your program and see, because we don't want to do any harm to our clients or do any more harm or expose them to situations that they may not have experienced. The last one that's in there is alumni groups. Is what we hear often within the programs is everything was great while I was in the program. I had all the support. Everyone was there. The judge was there. I'd go to court. People would tell me how well I'm doing when things were hard. I could go to my probation officer, my counselor, and they would help me with things. And then all of a sudden they leave the program. And then there's nothing there. So alumni groups really help this transition for people getting out of the program and to continue in their sobriety. So when a participant graduates the program, they have a place to go. There's still that support there with other adolescents, and maybe 18, 19 year olds that are still clean and sober. So alumni groups are important. And if you haven't thought about one within your program, this could be the time to start planning of how would that look within our community. Next slide, please.
Okay. So we also want this family involvement as part of the treatment process. And as Lori mentioned, the family therapy is also an important part of this. However, the caveat is when it's introduced, and also is there some pre kind of work that has gone on. The parents have had maybe one or two individual sessions. The juvenile has had one or two sessions that prepares them before they get put in or start doing family therapy. They're just not thrown in because there's the like Lori said, I unfortunately I've been in those sessions that are very uncomfortable where family comes in and they're not prepared, and it's just a lot of damage control afterwards. So also court attendance. In the prior session, we mentioned the importance of acknowledging a significant adult in that adolescent's life, and someone who is going to be going to court sessions with them, help them along the way, because parents may not readily be available for their juvenile in the Healing to Wellness Court. Also, family accountability, that definitely leads to, well, who is on this path with this juvenile? Is it a significant adult? Is it a relative? Is it their family? Because when they are no longer in Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, they will go back to their family, or they will go back to that individual who is taking care of them. So that need to build that family accountability. Also, taking a look at any additional services that the family may need. For example, Lori mentioned maybe housing, or they need some food assistance, or they might need some transportation. we look at the family as a whole, and that this juvenile is part of that. And when they are done with the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court, they're going to go back into this program. They're going to go back into this family. So how can we assist in building up this family so they have a chance to move on and not come back into our juvenile justice system? Next slide.
So Chris, before we start with questions, I want to mention something. And when we're looking at family accountability, I would recommend looking within your tribal law and order codes. And what does that say about family being added to the case? I have seen within a juvenile drug court program where a family has walked in the door. The adolescent was doing great, but there were some concerns about the family and whether they were using drugs. I have seen in jurisdictions where family can be drug tested as well, and they're held accountable as well when the juvenile is in the program. So know your codes and what they say. And so when I see family accountability, just as we hold our participants accountable and we want change for them, we want change to happen with the family as well. So this might, with the additional services that are necessary, this could mean that if we have a family member who's showing up who is suspected to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs, they also now need to get their services, and we link them for their services, because how do we expect change to happen with our teens when family is engaging in this self-destructive behavior? So that's the only thing I wanted to throw in, Chris, before we open it up to questions.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you, Lori and Chris. And Lori, that is a wonderful point that you just brought up regarding, what policies are you setting forth for parents as they are agreeing and allowing the youth to participate in these wellness court programs and these treatment court programs. So I appreciate making that comment, because I know that for courts that are looking at planning and implementation, just thinking about all of those unknowns is very important as you start to develop those policies and then those codes that will support your court. So again, thank you, both of you. Wonderful session. We are going to open up for questions, and so we can monitor the Q&A pod. And then I believe that we had a hand raised, and so I am going to call on Eva. I believe that you had your hand raised. We're going to allow you to ask your question.
I'm sorry. Are you calling on me?
Yes, we can hear you. Did you have a question? We saw your hand raised.
No.
Or a comment?
I don't think
All
so.
right.
I apologize.
Well, wonderful to hear your voice, Eva.
Hi,
Let
Anna.
us know. Eva's joining us from Rural Cap, which is our sister TA center in Alaska. So thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone else has a question, feel free to type in the chat box, or also you can raise your hand. We have a few minutes left, and so would love to have any feedback or comments on today's session. Feel free to let us know if you have anything that you wanted to share. And Lori and Chris, while we wait to see if anyone has additional questions or comments from today, I did want to go back to what Chris shared, the wellness enhancement training. Chris, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about the enhancement training, and I will put the registration link in the chat box while we wait. So I'll let you share anything about the enhancement training that you'd like to share quickly before we log off today.
Thanks, Anna. Just want to bring to your attention that our annual Tribal Healing to Wellness Court enhancement training will be June 21st through the 25th. We are doing an all virtual training again this year, and registration is now open, and Anna has put the link in the chat box, and it's a free training. We are pending approval for CLEs and CEUs, so hopefully those will get approved and we can provide those for you. We have some great presentations signed up. We will have presentations regarding family healing to wellness courts, just in general information, multidisciplinary presentations. We will have a specific veterans presentations, and of course, a complete slot dedicated to juvenile healing to wellness court. So we hope that you will join us this year. And that if you're a first time attendee, great. But if you continue to support us by joining our enhancement training, we thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I put the registration link in the chat. And again, like Chris shared, we have a juvenile track planned, and many of the parts of the conversation that we had today, I think are going to come up throughout that week of sessions. Like Chris shared at the start of this session, we have one specifically dedicated to addressing confidentiality and ethics issues for the professionals that are involved in your wellness court, and the considerations for the different ethics standards that you have as professionals coming in to provide services. We'll also have some sessions on cultural integration, data management for juvenile wellness court participants, and a couple of other sessions that hopefully you'll find helpful if you're already have an established wellness court, or if you're in the planning phase of your wellness court. So I just see a few questions, just some thank yous for today. Chris and Lori, I just want to thank you again on behalf of the Tribal Youth Resource Center for your work, for your time today, and just for your continued dedication to supporting tribal communities. And so I want to thank you both. We look forward to continuing this series. From the feedback that you provide, Janice is going to place an evaluation link in the session chat box. Please fill it out. Let us know that if you have commentary or questions from the sessions that you either couldn't ask today, didn't want to ask today, or maybe you want to go back and review session 1 and provide us with some overall feedback. We would love to know what additional training you're interested in this area. And we look forward to future sessions and more conversations with Lori and Chris about providing treatment and coordinating services for youth in the Juvenile Healing to Wellness Court. So the contact information for both our presenters today is on the screen. We will be sending out session materials after this session, so you can review later, and you can always email us at tribalyouth@tlpi.org if you want more information about Juvenile Healing to Wellness Courts, about tribal youth programs, or really any initiatives that you're working on to support the youth in your community. So we want to thank you all for your presence today. Thank you for giving us some of your time. We wish you well in all of your endeavors and your work with tribal youth. So thank you again, and we hope you all have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
weekend.